Please let me start this eulogy by introducing you to the Familia Jaramillo. But before I begin, I want to caveat my speech by saying that some of the details are fuzzy, as they are derived from the collective memory of various family members. The story that I'm going to tell you today is like an impressionistic collage that will not always follow a linear trajectory. My grandfather, Angel Maria Jaramillo, courted and married my grandmother, Maria Lueene Polvay sometime around 1920 in the provincial town of Guaranda next to the great volcano Chimborazo in Ecuador. Angel was a humble man who was interested in the law and served the government over the course of his life in different positions, depending on which way the political pendulum swung. My grandmother Maria came from a well-to-do family with large landholdings in many parts of the country. She was a bit younger than Angel, and because he was of mestizo blood, her family threatened to disinherit her if she married him. But Maria's love for Angel was strong, and so she gave up her comfortable life to embrace a humble life with him, and their family grew quickly. Both were Catholic, and as you know, Catholic families tend to be large. So as the family grew and the economic situation waxed and waned, Angel did his best to keep food on the table. First came a daughter, Ana, then two sons, Guillermo and Gustavo. My father, Jaime, was fourth. After him came another girl, Maria Luisa, and then two more sons, Virgilio and Victor Hugo. When Jaime came into the world on July 20th, 1933, the economic situation in the family was tough because my grandfather was a judge and had to travel to different provinces to hear cases, leaving my grandmother at home at the time with 4 children, so my grandparents sent him to live for several years with one of my grandmother's sisters, who lived on a hacienda. Since he was quite young when he started living there, he quickly became accustomed to the finer things that life with a rich aunt could afford him. He grew up not realizing that he came from that humble family back in the provincial town. So years later, when he was ordered back to the family home that by then had moved to the capital city of Quito, the shock of adjusting to the now crowded household and limited resources birthed in him a desire to prosper, a desire that would become the driving force of his entire life. It also put him on a collision course with my grandfather, to whom alcohol had become a comfort after long-standing hostilities between Ecuador and Peru were put to rest for a time at the signing of the Rio de Janeiro peace accord, brokered by the United States, Brazil, and Argentina, which required Ecuador to cede half of its disputed national territory to Peru in 1942. After having served as a lower cabinet minister during the administration of President Carlos Alberto Arroyo del Rio, my grandfather Angel was not happy with the outcome, and his consumption of alcohol increased. According to my father, Angel's drinking would become a source of embarrassment, mostly for my father, who aspired to hobnob with Quito's elite. Through his childhood and adolescence, he frequently clashed with my grandfather Angel, who wanted him to join the military and serve the country. Meanwhile, my father would purposely cross the street to the other side with his friends to avoid the spectacle of his father's drunken stumbling. That is the way my father would tell the story many years later when he began attending Al-Anon, the counterpart 12-step program to Alcoholics Anonymous, which he was a member of for well over 3 decades. And forgive me for jumping ahead, and I'm not carelessly repeating things that I heard at a meeting. It is important for me to say that I never had the privilege of meeting my grandfather Angel. From everything my Aunt Ana had told me about him, giving to me a book containing all his honors, awards, and merit citations from his government service, I know that my grandfather was an honorable man, and I feel a terrible void in my life having never known him. Now let me get back to the story of my father. By the mid-1950s, Jaime was organizing large social events, making profits from selling tickets and from the markup on food and beverages he sold at the parties. It was not uncommon for his soirees to be talked about in the gossip columns of the newspapers. He also teamed up with my aunt, Ana Lucia, the eldest sibling, who by then had become a locally renowned poetry recitalist, having honed her poetic craft under the tutelage of my grandfather Angel, who vicariously lived his dream of being a poet and a writer through her. Ana also had landed a minor role in the first silent film shot in Ecuador called Amanecer en el Pichincha by the Chilean director Alberto Santana, and she helped Jaime get a part as an extra in the film. Their participation gained them a bit of celebrity, which they both leveraged to climb the Ecuadorian social ladder. Both were good-looking, poised, charming, and talented at bringing people together. They both came to love the spotlight and the attention and the acclaim. By 1959, Ana had gone on tour reciting poetry throughout South America, while my two eldest uncles, Guillermo and Gustavo, had become established in Los Angeles working as mechanics, and so they invited Jaime for a visit. But family tragedy struck. My other aunt, Maria Luisa, became gravely ill due to a botched illegal abortion and died, leaving two daughters in the care of my grandmother, Maria Luzmila, while their father, Anibal, a military man, continued his service for the country. According to Jaime, Maria Luisa made him promise just before she died that he would go to the US, become established, and then return later to take her daughters there, along with my grandmother, so they could be raised in America. And that is when, according to my father, that he decided he was going to follow his American dream and work hard to become a millionaire. So when Jaime arrived at the Los Angeles International Airport in the summer of 1959, he was greeted by US Customs agents who inquired as to the purpose of his trip. And my father replied, "I've come to America in pursuit of a dream. I want to become a millionaire." The customs agent, smiling, then asked, "Well then, how much money did you bring with you?" My father replies, $40. "But I am a very hard worker, and in no time I will have much, much more." According to my father, the agent laughed heartily and stamped his passport and allowed him in. The part of the story about working hard was very true. In a short time, my father began working for American Airlines catering division at the Los Angeles International Airport, first in tray assembly and then moving up to the bakery department, making breads and pastries. That is when he became aware of a tall, voluptuous woman with dark brown eyes and light brown hair, who, according to Jaime, would stare at him, watching him. He became enamored with her eyes and wanted, in his heavily accented English, to tell her just that. So he consulted his friends, and having practiced what to say, he approached her and said, "Excuse me, but you have beautiful ass." Wilma Luene's face became red, and she quickly ran away while my father's friends laughed and laughed. My father says, "That was the day your mother fell madly in love with me, because she started following me everywhere. When I later got a job at Hug's Bakery making Wonder Bread, a better paying job, your mother would take me to work and pick me up. She was there waiting for me every morning with hot coffee when I got off work at 6 a.m. That is when I fell in love with her, when I realized that she hadn't even gone home after dropping me off, but had slept in the car all night long. Where in the world will I ever find another woman like her, so willing to do so much? She sacrificed a lot to help me prosper." Apparently within weeks, their relationship turned romantic. My mother got pregnant, and after I was born in Santa Monica in 1961, they went to Las Vegas to get married. Not long after that, Jaime returned to Ecuador to retrieve Maria Luisa's two daughters and my grandmother, but my grandfather did not come with them. In all these years, I've never gotten a straight answer from anyone in the family why my grandfather remained back in Ecuador. Well, not long after that, my father went to beauty school during the day while working nights at the bakery, and by the time my two sisters, Joconda Lorell and Maria Lueene, were born, he received his license in cosmetology. His first job was as a shampoo boy at a beauty salon in Beverly Hills, where he would tell coworkers who laughed at him that he would someday be its owner. By 1967, that dream came true. thanks to 3 generous Jewish clients of his who each loaned him $1,000 so he could put the down payment on the salon. Within 2 years, and after remodeling the salon in a scandalous colors, black and white checkerboard floor, purple walls, satin and velvet curtains, and silver stars hanging from the ceiling, his salon began attracting many high-profile Hollywood clients, mostly the wives of producers and directors, but through his doors also passed the likes of Florence Marley, Ali McGraw, and Debbie Reynolds, who introduced him to the Thalians Club that led him to greater opportunities when he rekindled his previous talent for organizing parties. But this time, his parties were at the Beverly Wilshire, the Bel Air, and the Beverly Hills hotels. By the late 1970s, he was well on his way to realizing the dream he had first had when he arrived in the United States, his American dream. He had a beautiful wife, who people often regarded as sharing a likeness with Marilyn Monroe. That middle pink picture there. And 3 beautiful children. But let me tell you, living the high life in Hollywood and Beverly Hills can take a serious toll on a family. My parents began to fight as my mother sought to gain independence from the party scene. Her preoccupation was for us, while my father's preoccupation was to increase his prestige and his wealth. My mother went to night school and became a bookkeeper and began to make a career of her own. They sent us to the best Catholic schools. We had many wonderful family get-togethers in which my Aunt Anna and I would perform shows, recite poems, and sing songs. Those will always be the most memorable times of my youth. Nonetheless, our family began to slowly disintegrate as my father's long-suppressed anger and rage at his father began bubbling to the surface. By the 1980s, our family was shattered. My parents had long been on the verge of divorce. However, as a last resort, my mother took my father to an Al-Anon meeting. I lost my place. Al-Anon meeting after he had thrown a fit and ruptured a disc in his back. I have to say that Al-Anon saved his life and helped them rekindle their relationship. It also helped me tremendously as well after I was disfellowshipped from Jehovah's Witnesses. Eventually, we all ended up in Oregon by the early 1990s, after my father and mother bought a ranch in Florence during a coastal trip from Canada to Los Angeles. But the family happiness would be shattered again and again as other problems would wax and wane. My parents finally got divorced for the first time in 1991, but then remarried in 1994, but then divorced again in 2004. That is why I say that they have been married 3 times and divorced twice. The first time in Vegas, the second time in the Catholic Church, and the 3rd time in Florence. It was a very tumultuous time for all of us, but after the second divorce, my father and I finally became much closer. After he admitted to me that as a young man, he too felt attraction to other men, like I had since my teens, but he had chosen to live his life as a straight man. I, in turn, floundered for many years trying to do the same thing, terribly unhappy, until I met an angel. We met at a church worship service during one of my visits to Los Angeles, and I became enamored with her voice. I invited her to Florence for a visit, where I had been living at the time in the early 90s, and so I want to tell you a brief anecdote that happened. It's a story that I frequently tell to illustrate the perils of accents in English pronunciation. Well, my girlfriend had spent hours in the kitchen making us a meal. She was so happy and wanted to make it a good impression. But my father's accent has always been very thick. And so, when the dinner was over and my girlfriend asked how he liked the meal, my father said, "Was delicious." But my girlfriend's face became bright red and she turned around and marched back into the kitchen. She was very upset. I went to her and I asked, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I've slaved for hours making a special dinner, and when I ask your father how he likes it, all he can say is wash the dishes." And so he sobbed while I tried to explain, she sobbed while I tried to explain to her that it must be just a misunderstanding. After all, things didn't work out between me and her because after I was diagnosed with AIDS in 1992, I broke up with her. Even though she still wanted to marry me, knowing about the condition, I didn't think it was fair for her, especially since I had to completely be honest with her and admit that I was queer. Well, since the divorce in 2004, I've spent several years close to my father, helping him to pick up the pieces. He drew close to his church in Florence and was always extremely generous to all of them, hosting many parties at his home, and always welcoming everyone, telling them that they were his true family in Christ. We also took several trips together, cruises to Mexico and Alaska, and trips to Ecuador. We also worked together flipping houses, but in 2008, the economic crash hit all of us hard, and my father lost what little fortune he had left. His prostate cancer had metastasized, but was developing very slowly. According to the neurologist, he suffered dozens of microstrokes that went unnoticed. He developed dementia and was diagnosed with early onset of Alzheimer's. He moved into assisted living for a couple years and then was later transferred to a memory care. This was a very, very difficult time for me. I had begun a bachelor's program at the UO in 2010 and a master's program in 2013 and now a PhD program as of 2015. All the while my father's condition worsened, family conflicts and drama escalated, but I kept my eyes on two things, my studies and my father. However, this past summer his condition deteriorated considerably. In early November, I finally got him to see the neurologist who changes medications, and he improved slightly, but then by mid-December he contracted pneumonia. While he was in the hospital, he was agonizing in pain, his body contorted. It was so painful to see him that way. And he refused treatment, and so the doctor recommended that he begin hospice care, and that means administration of morphine. Amazingly, once he began this treatment, he rebounded for a few days, and his lucidity returned, such that his body relaxed, he ate some food, and we were able to gather around him, sing songs to him, hug him, and tell him how much he's meant to us all these years, and to say our goodbyes while he was able to smile and enjoy our presence. Several days later, he passed away on Christmas Eve morning. Despite all the craziness, I have never given up on my father, who throughout my life has given me so much, who told me so many wonderful stories, who taught me to be courageous and to be abundantly generous and kind to people, and I choose today to focus on the good memories and the special times we had before his decline. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being here today to honor an immigrant from Ecuador who followed his dream and got to live it for a while. I know that wherever he is right now, he is there waiting with open arms, ready to receive his family and all his friends at his celestial celebration with that witty charm of his and that warm, endearing big smile. Thank you. So